And we're live. So I'm here with Jeff and Jonathan. Right then. We're going to be looking at this episode. So I think the plan is Jeff's going to give a description of what happened in the episode whilst these slides automatically scroll through. And then he's going to read out his review of the episode. And then I'll come in and Jonathan can come in maybe before me. And I was thinking sort of my contribution, we could maybe talk about conflict on different levels, physical level, social level, interpersonal level, and inner level. I don't think there's that much inner level in this one, but that will come on later on. There's a certain particular moment where we get inner conflict. So over to Jeff. Oh, starting.
All right, so this is Genesis of the Daleks, Part 3, and I'm not going to read the entire episode summary because it just goes into too much detail, but especially because the first paragraph is pretty much just, Sarah and the Mutos are trying to escape from the Thalls and continue climbing and getting shot at, and then they catch them and bring them back again. So that's the gist of that. And meanwhile, Harry and the Doctor are looking for the dome city. Before they can get to it, Harry steps into a giant shell creature, and it closes on his foot, and the Doctor has to use a large rock and some sort of stalactite and a combination of things to get Harry out. And anyway, something else is larger and more menacing is making sounds, so they get out of there. Meanwhile, the Daleks report to Davros, who wants the optical and sensory circuits enhanced, thus wanting the dismantling of the neuro circuit for this to be accomplished. After Davros tells his scientists this, he leaves. A tall, younger, dark-haired Khalid named Kavil informs a hesitant Ronson that the escaped prisoners have reached the Dome City and made contact with the government leaders. Kavil is in charge of the communications station. Nider spots them talking in whispers, and Kavil tells Ronson that a secret meeting is to take place about Davros's experiments. At the meeting in the dome, Mogran and Ravon, among many others, listen to the Doctor explain about events in the future and that the Daleks and the project here will affect not just this planet but many others. For 1,000 generations, the name of Dalek will spread fear and terror. There is a dome model in the room which the camera focuses on. Mogran had thought there was no listening devices here for Davros to find out about his meeting. Thalls push Sarah and Severin back to work in the Thal Dome. Nider in the bunker reports back to Davros. He's heard from one of their spies in the Khalid Dome. I wonder who that could be. About a secret meeting. Davros wants a full report about what went on there and is not very concerned. He tells Nider he's resisted those who would stop his work for more than 50 years. Nider also tells him that Ronson's prisoners were at the secret meeting. The two of them stare at Ronson. Davros says he will take no action yet, but he'll deal with them in his own way. Ravon in the dome tells the Doctor it was an impressive speech. The counselors will not stop work in the bunker permanently, but a tribunal will investigate the bunker and suspend the work until the investigation is complete. It's less than the Doctor hoped for. Mogran must now inform Davros. Ravon, after Mogran and the others leave, tells the Doctor and Harry that one of their agents in the Thal Dome has heard of a female prisoner, not a Muto or a Khalid, that led a breakout of the slave laborers and gave the Thals quite a lot of trouble. Harry thinks that would be Sarah. Harry and the Doctor ask about the Thal rocket. Ravon tells them the Thal rocket cannot penetrate the Khalid Dome, which is reinforced by an inventions of Davros, a new substance that has the same effect as if it were 30-foot thick reinforced concrete. Raven rambles on, yelling about their eventual defeat of the Thals. He also tells them he can give them an agent to get them to a service shaft under the Thal city, and he also gives them a map. Mogran returns to Davros about the investigation. Davros plays nice and tells Mogran the Khalid people have sacrificed much for the work at the bunker and have a right to know about it. He tells him the elite and the people must work as one to bring about a final victory, but he wants 24 hours to shut down. Mogran insists it must be 12. By then, the members of the tribunal will arrive. Mogran and his two men leave. Nider is upset and wonders why Davros isn't. Davros said that the investigation will not happen. The council has signed the death warrant of the whole of the Khalid people. And Davros asks if Nider ever doubted he would do that. Nider tells him he didn't. Then he says there could be 20 travel machines. Snyder objects; they are unstable and erratic. But Davros wants to make a computer program to limit the travel machines' actions so he can control them. The Doctor rises up in the Thal dome, but has to shut the floorboard. A Thal guard is standing with his back to the hole. Another guard arrives, and both guards leave. This gives the Doctor and Harry time to climb up into the halls. They walk down a hall, but turn and walk the opposite way and hide as Thal guards. One with a helmet goes into a room where people are talking. By the way, some Thals that weren't all blonde in this scene, Ben. We were talking about that last week. The Doctor and Harry open the door and look in the wrong window. There in the room are Davros and Niter talking to the Thal leaders. Davros tells the leader he's no longer influenced by words such as patriotism and nationalism. He just wants peace, even if it means annihilation for his own people. The Thal rocket will destroy the Kala Dome. The Doctor and Harry have to hide as another guard passes by, but they manage to hear how Davros will help the Thals do this. Davros gives the Thal leader a chemical formula that, when put into normal artillery shells and fired on the dome, will weaken the molecular structure, making it brittle enough for the rocket to destroy the formerly impenetrable shield. Davros asks only that he be in on the reconstruction of their planet. Niter and Davros come out as the Doctor and Harry hide. Thals will escort Niter and Davros out of the Thal dome. Harry tells the Doctor they have to warn the Collins. Doctor walks up to two guards who are wearing black protective suits and head coverings and says, excuse me, can you help me? I'm a spy. And then he smashes their heads together, so they fall with that old trick. In the Thal rocket bay, Sarah wonders why they're being left in the base of the rocket. It's fully loaded now. When fired, the slave workers are left here. They'll be buried alive. Sarah realizes that is what the Thals plan. Two guards in protective suits come in, and another near Sarah's group comes over to them. One of the new arrivals, in reality Harry, punches this guard.
Just into when he said buried alive, it's not that they'll be buried alive; they'll be burnt up by the rocket flames.
Yeah, that's what she said. Yeah. Sarah starts to explain to Harry and the Doctor, who take off their head coverings. But the Doctor sends Harry and Sarah, who asks Severin to come with them back to the Kala Dome to warn the leaders there. He wants to try to stay and sabotage the rocket. And then, of course, he tells everybody to leave, that they're free, instead of getting anybody to stay behind and help him or anything. So anyway, Sarah, Harry, and Severin make it to the hallway hole duct, and down it before pursuing guards arrive. Two of them start shooting down the hole at them. In the rocket bay, the fallen guard gets up and crawls over to a wallboard of buttons as the Doctor examines the rocket, and in particular a grid. The guard manages to push one button, and this makes the Doctor, whose right hand is touching the grid, get stuck to the grid net, and the entire grid shoots electric bolts through both sides of his body. Because, he had to get rid of everybody else, so there was no one left to stop the guard from electrocuting him. They had to take care of that. All right, so there's the summary. And when I wrote my review back in 2007, I said, the plot thickens, and then thins, and then thickens. Michael Wisher's performance as Davros is fantastic. I'm slightly disappointed that they still haven't explained much of his personal history, though. After not having the time to watch part 3 until a few days after part 2, it felt a little like I had seen the first movie and now was watching the sequel. So I think I need to watch part 2 of part 4. Didn't see that electrocution coming. Might not be as simple as the clam. Bung a rock at it, which of course was my reference to the second Doctor's line back from The Abominable Snowman. Anyway, I said I'd give this one a 9. And before I forget, I wanted to, I'll look at the screenshots a little bit and maybe it'll jog my memory. But I remember, last week Ben said something about the whole thing about them escaping from the Thals and getting captured again was kind of wasting time. But honestly, I still think it was there just sort of to show, to kind of give Sarah something to do where she kind of showed some of her personality. So I haven't made too much of a secret in my past comments on Doctor Who that I had a bit of a crush on Sarah as a kid and still now. So honestly, I don't mind seeing her featured, especially when she gets to actually have some action, so I don't mind that part. But I didn't remember, like, as I was watching this again, there were things that sort of I see and came back to me that I didn't remember. Like, I really didn't remember the Khalid leaders, like that scene at all. It just didn't have much of an impact, I guess, on me enough that I even remembered them. And I'm like, oh yeah, those people existed. And I think that was part of the reason why the line where Davros says the whole of the Khalid people, I don't think I understood that the first time around. And it was only like hearing it this time where I understood what he meant by that, where he basically was talking about, we're sheltered in this bunker, and I'm going to actually send, even separate from the rocket, like basically I'm just going to kill everybody who isn't part of our group because we're the only ones I care about surviving, and ultimately just care about the Daleks surviving. But anyway, for whatever reason, I didn't quite grasp that concept the first time that's what he was talking about. So it shows that even, rewatching any things can still sort of be new. And so that was, we also had another musical cue. We talked about those, when they showed the Daleks again, when they cut to the scene where the Daleks are just in the room and they had that little musical thing where it plays the dun dun, kind of thing. It's, again, those little effective things that they put in to keep the mood and atmosphere. And I talked about Michael Wisher's performance, but it's not even just him, but it's just everything about it, as we talked about, is we're keeping the menace and the tension high and keeping the atmosphere that this is this serious threat going on all the time. And of course, the audience, there's the dramatic irony of the audience knows, at least most of the audience has seen Daleks before and knows what they're capable of. So this seeing, them in their earliest stages and being talked about as, oh, we've got more Daleks, so we're up to 20 now, but they're erratic. And, we're getting these little things like what's to come as far as, when, maybe they're going to get a little too hard for Davros to control, that sort of thing. And once again, as I said, I noticed that there were some falls that aren't blonde in the scene because Ben talked about that last week. So, and now Ben's mic is muted. So,
thank you, Jeff. I was just saying that. I don't know why. I don't even know why I come in here. Is there anything that you were saying? You were going to say something before we came on air, Jeff. There was some particular thing that you wanted to make sure you didn't forget to say. Oh no. So this episode was there. Anyway, if I don't mind you interrupting me if you see something that jogs your memory.
Yeah, well, I think that's the main things that occurred to me. But like I said, if something else pops up in a picture, I'll be sure to mention it. I mean, I guess I talked about Michael Wisher. I think Peter Miles as Niter does a really good job too. And if you see him, as I have, because I rewatched recently the two Third Doctor stories he was in, Silurians and Invasion of the Dinosaurs. If you look at those two characters in this one, you can see that he makes each character distinct. There are some similarities to how he portrays them, but they're so often with guest characters on Doctor Who, they don't necessarily always get a great opportunity to show their acting range. But I think you've seen in his that he's played each one of those characters differently. They're not just sort of stock villain type characters. So you're talking about
Peter Miles?
Yes. Right. So I give some credit to him for what, how obviously there's other things like directing and writing that play as far as how the characters are different, but I give him credit for making sure that his portrayal is not too much like the previous characters that he played. So you don't see them as all being the same person.
What's a random comment? This guy's a little bit like Martin Amis. Right.
I don't know who that is.
Right. Some interesting. One of the things I thought about with this was Robert McKee. He used to write about 3 levels of conflict. He had extra personal, and then inner conflict. And then he wrote a later book called Dialogue, where he split it up into 4 levels. And most of those levels, we have conflict on those levels. So we've got like the physical level of conflict. And so we could say all the stuff with climbing up the rocket and the actual physical jeopardy with like the guy hanging Sarah over the edge and threatening her life. And just it's interesting with Sarah that you might have some thoughts on this, Jeff. It's like she seems to be caught between 2 roles in terms of the writers that they have for Sarah, in that she's assertive in that she leads the escape, but then she's the one that gets scared, and the audience experiences fear through Sarah when she's climbing up the rocket. And it's almost as if she's sort of like falling back into that role that they used to have the female assistant fall into.
Yeah, I think I don't think she's an entirely unrealistic character, because it's not like there aren't people that, faced with those situations. I think I called it last week, biting off more than she can chew. She tends to kind of jump into things and then figure out she couldn't quite accomplish what she thought she could. So that part is not unrealistic, but I do think, sometimes they are kind of in a quandary where they're like, well, we want this to be a strong female character, yet there's times at which we really do need to have a damsel in distress type thing, and so she's the most convenient one for them to be used for that in certain situations. But yeah, I think the other thing that I thought of was I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that they re-recorded the opening part of this episode on film, because didn't the last episode end where that part was on the video, and then they recorded, they had the beginning of this one, it was the film part for when they were actually going to be on the rocket itself.
All that stuff at the beginning is definitely all on film, with going up, all that's film.
In the previous episode, that the parts where she was climbing were still on the videotape part. So I think they reshot that. I mean, the film may have been shot first, but in other words, they shot it 2 different times, her actually climbing up the scaffolding.
What usually happens with Doctor Who is they usually did all the actual filming before they're in studio.
But anyway, that makes it sort of a little jarring too, in terms of that they redo that scene, and so it's kind of like, wait a minute, this is not the way we saw it last week.
I've got to say though, the lighting is brilliant. I mean, when you have lighting like this, you don't have to pay for so much stuff behind them. I mean, I just think this is like proper Hollywood quality lighting here.
Yeah, I guess the only thing is, like, there's a few, like that shot right there, I think is good. It seems like the times where they were showing them more up close, it didn't look as convincing. So I honestly think they should have stuck with more wide shots to give the illusion of them climbing up this very tall thing, because it seemed like it showed them up close that it looked more like they were just on like a little jungle gym or something, instead of like a big towering structure.
I think maybe from a practical point of view, I think when you're looking up with the studios at the time, they had a lot of lights on the ceiling, and I don't think they didn't have. And I suppose maybe for those bits where they did I think the BBC used to own a little bit of Ealing Studios where they would shoot these bits on film, but they didn't. But they used to have a rule. I think it was like 12 minutes an episode. They were allowed to have a maximum of 12 minutes because film was more expensive than videotape.
Yeah, I've read a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff where there was a ton of issues with budget and timing, and also various times like certain unions were going on strike from various
big time,
and so they had to deal with those. So there was a lot of production hassles that would go on that would cause delays or
the situation with the situations with unions in England in the 1970s is scarcely believable, and you would think it was a spoof. So, for example, there was literally a dispute called the Crackerjack. There was a dispute in Doctor Who between demarcation, where the different unions would fight, would have turf battles with each other. And so the thing in the TARDIS that goes up and down, the props department made sure that was powered by air rather than electricity, because the electricians union would say, no, that's ours, it runs off electricity. And so it would have all of these arguments over demarcation as to which union is in charge in this particular bit. So it became very ridiculous, the amount of unionization. So it was amazing that hardly anything got done, and there was a lot of strike.
Even at the start of Doctor Who,
there was strike. Yeah,
with the very beginning of it, the only way like that they were able to continue the show, to keep it going, was because of the fact that they had started it had been under the responsibility of like the BBC's like education division or something like that instead, or children's education department instead of entertainment.
Children's TV.
And so they were basically able to if it had been the entertainment division, they would have canceled it, but they were able to continue it because they said, no, we have to give this amount of time for like children's education material or whatever. So it was like,
I think there was 3: drama, light education, and children's.
Right. So it wasn't. So the drama department wanted to get rid of it, but they wouldn't let them because it was not officially under their like.
Exactly, not under that. And originally, I think Sidney Newman said to the female producer Verity Lambert, "No BEMs, no bug-eyed monsters," and they had a lot of those historical stories to educate the children.
Right.
And then, but when the Daleks was a huge success, it was like, yeah, all right then.
Yeah. I mean, for a while though, they really did alternate between, they would have this story, the future stories with aliens, but the insistence was, well, you have to find a way to work in scientific concepts you can teach the kids in the sci-fi stories with the aliens, and then the other ones will be the historicals.
Oh, I remember with Robert Holmes, they would like brought up to him about, look at the words you use in here, Robert. This is supposed to be written for children. He said it's written for intelligent children. It's written for intelligent, because like his vocabulary, like perfidious and poltroon and parvenu, it's like a pretty wide vocabulary there, Robert Holmes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although that was his Blake 7 story when he used the word parvenu. So yeah. What did you think, Jonathan?
I don't have many thoughts that haven't been said already.
You've not been, okay, fair enough. Okay, so what maybe so we can say maybe we could look at this story on the McKee levels. So we've got the physical level, which I sort of mentioned before with Sarah, and there's always that element in Doctor Who, stuff on a physical level, actual physical jeopardy, and nearly all of the cliffhanger endings literally are cliffhanger endings where it's like they used to call it in Doctor Who the unfolding text suspended enigma, but usually one of the heroes is life is in peril at the end of an episode. And so on a physical level, we've got all the stuff with Sarah climbing the rocket and all of that. There's stuff with Harry and the clamshell and hitting it down, and then with the spike in there again, that's something else on the physical level. What else did we have on the physical level? Oh, the Tom Baker actually, like, not for self-defense, but just like use violence on people to knock the heads of those 2 guards together. And then right at the end, we have the physical jeopardy as well with the that grid where he's like being electrocuted. Now, arguably, we could say that this episode is bookended by 2 sections that are not exactly super relevant. Well, the rocket stuff, that sequence could have been cut out, and I think that they actually might have done a shorter version of this, maybe released it in America, where they did like a 2-hour version. They cut a lot of that stuff out with the rocket because it didn't really go anywhere. But with that, you have an escape attempt, but it fails. But at least the stuff with the rocket is relevant because of later on. And it is relevant to the plot.
We've talked about before Terry Nation sort of reusing his own outline for stories, and you had the section of the original Dalek story where the Thals and the Doctor and the companions, or whatever combination of them, were having to cross the wastelands to get to the Dalek city. And so there's some similarities to this, but I think they figured out that they did waste a little too much time with that in the first story, that it was maybe a little too padded. So they actually, even though they have the stuff with the rocket, it doesn't seem to drag as much as that did. It seems like the pacing of the episode still seemed to go very fast. Like when they got to the scene, I actually watching it on the DVD, my player started having some problems near the end of the episode, and I didn't. When I looked at how much time was left, it was only like a minute, and I was like, "Wow, that was fast." So it didn't seem like it took that long. So despite the fact that some of this may be, as you say, things that could have been cut, it doesn't seem to be dragging along. It still seems to be moving at a quick pace, and maybe some of that is the number of times they cut back and forth between the two. Between different action, different sets, and that sort of creates the illusion that more is happening over a longer period of time. And so I think that was more effectively done, whether it was for budget reasons or whatever, or just realizing story-wise that it was better to do it this way. It could be that this director was better. I don't know. Regardless, it just seems like that part of the story, it moved along at a faster pace. But time will tell as we go to the second half of the story, because with the original Dalek story, it was 7 episodes, and it was somewhere around episodes 5 and 6 where it really started to drag a bit before the more the climax or the conclusion. And so we'll find out if the same thing happens here, but somehow I suspect it won't.
No, I think it gets better and better. Now, this actor, he played that character in Hello, Hello, and that you used to watch, Jeff, as a kid, Hello, Hello.
I did, but I certainly don't remember much about the characters. So
yeah, but what's weird is I think that actor in real life might be a Cockney, because the first line he shouts is "Come back down here," and then he goes back and he goes sort of like posher. Because you had a lot of that at the time, where people would sort of lose their natural accent and learn this sort of theatrical accent.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this bit from Davros where he says, I want improvements to be made to the optical systems and the sensory circuits. And the reason I like that is not because of the NT stuff, it's because he then says their instincts must be as accurate as a scientific instrument. Because I keep talking about this thing all the moment, instinct versus intuition. And I think that sensing should be renamed as instincting, because it's got these extra things in. Because when you look at because it's more to it. Like, for instance, you would say, Jeff, that do you think there is, say, a guardian instinct and an artisan instinct?
Yeah.
So that was just that. So I think what a lot happened in this episode is using these McKee levels. I think quite a bit happened on the social level, because we got the car-led politicians when he goes to meet them. Here, we've got the car-led politicians. So Robert McKee would say that the social level is conflict that you get from, say, the government, authorities, sort of like when it's people that you don't really know their names, where they're sort of like, it's nothing personal, it's just that they represent these forces, these societal forces. And here you can say that, like Tom, like the Doctor doesn't know anything about these people's personalities. It's not their personalities that he's conflicting with. It's because they represent the government. So it's social. It's conflict on the social level. And then we have the politicians later on, where we have the car-led politicians here, where we have their politicians. So you've got stuff going on the political, social level in this.
And I think that's the more interesting part. I mean, some of the action scenes are good also, but it's kind of the idea of who's spying on who's the double crossers, who's working, who has what agendas, and that's usually, to me, in drama, shows the most interesting thing is when you are able to successfully have several characters with their own personal agendas, and it's not 100% clear who's working with who or who against who. It makes it so much more interesting because it adds that level of tension where it's not just a straight good guys versus bad guys. You don't really know for sure. You can have suspicions, as I alluded to myself, about who is the spy. And I mean, this guy obviously, looks very suspicious as he's trying to get Ronson to open up to him. So they're not always subtle, but it's still kind of fun to have.
But he had enough information though.
Right.
Ronson is like, I'm screwed either way, because he has that information on him.
And that's one of the things I like about it is that you have you have the characters are written intelligently, as you said.
Yes.
They're not dumbed down, and they're not written as caricatures. Even Davros, who is seen as the ultimate villain, like he still has layers to what he's talking about in his proposals, and you have the Doctor even talking about how he's the brilliant scientific mind, so he's showing him this respect at the same time, and not just painting him as he's this cartoon villain.
Yeah.
So, and there was something else that I was going to say about that. Dang it!
He hardly rants.
But I was kind of.
He hardly rants in this story. In future stories, he rants, and plus you get actors not quite. I mean, Roy. I mean, the guy that played him in the 80s was good enough, but the Goodison guy, he played him in 79, wasn't that great. But getting back to this story, again, perfect performance from Michael Wisher. I'm just thinking this might be because we know quite a bit about this character from the previous episode, and the audience can, in that we sort of know enough about this character that it sort of moved from the social level to the personal level, in that you've got like the personal conflict, like I was saying here, between, it's like, do you know what I mean? It's like we know the characters a little bit more, where we can say this is not just social level. It's like, okay, these are the guys, these are the good guys, these are actual people we know a little bit. And that's like the personal dynamic between those two. Whereas with those politicians, we don't really know that much about them. You see what I mean? It's like a little bit further away. Yeah,
like I said, I had almost forgotten they existed from when I watched the story before. That's how inconsequential that they seem in the big picture of the story. But one thing that I did think of that I was going to say is that another thing that I didn't really think about much when I saw this the first time was the dynamic between the Doctor and Harry. And as we talked about briefly in the first part, they had originally thought that the actor who played the Fourth Doctor was going to be older, and Harry was going to have to do more of the physical scenes. But the interesting thing that you have created it in them deciding to keep Harry in the story anyway, even though they cast a younger actor, is that what you talked about with the Doctor not knowing these people's personality and stuff like that, is that you have that sensing intuition or instinct intuition, whatever you want to call it, difference between them, where the Doctor is talking about the big picture of the future and what the Daleks will become. And Harry is sort of there to remind him of the logistical, like, here's what we actually have to accomplish, physically or socially with the people in order to get this to happen. So I think probably this is the story that Harry's probably used in the best, in terms of him actually seeming like he had. I mean, the Sontaran experiment to an extent, that was only 2 episodes, but again, where he had a purpose for being there and sort of fills that role, as opposed to just sort of being a hanger-on that happens to be there, or treated as an imbecile like he was in Revenge of the Cybermen. So in this story, it's like you see that the Doctor sort of has to constrain what he wants to do, because how do we actually accomplish this? And so Harry's there sort of remind, well, we have to get this message across, and you have to warn this person, and we have to do these things. So, this is how we take the bigger goal and sort of shrink it to what we have to do in the moment. And I think I said in first or second part that the closest we've had to this story in terms of the setup of the Daleks sort of being at their weakest, in terms of they haven't really been given their position of power yet, was in the power of the Daleks, when the story is that, the Daleks are basically in hibernation, and then the scientist brings that one Dalek out and tries to keep control over him. So there's some elements of that in this story. And so you have that same kind of idea of the audience knows the threat and the Doctor knows the threat, but not everybody else. Like, the other people have to be convinced of that, but they have to be convinced of it in a way where they don't just think, oh, this is a crackpot, insane guy telling me this. It has to be, you have to do it in a way that gets the seriousness of the threat across, but doesn't just come across as, you're crazy, so I'm not going to listen to you.
I just thought of something. So, has the Doctor talked to Davros yet?
I don't think so. I mean, they had that very brief scene where they were in the room, but I don't think he really did talk to him.
Because in the first episode, he said, "Who is this Davros?" And that was played like he literally did not know who he was, because the original timeline is, well, you know what I mean? Like, not to spoil it for the audience, but you know what I mean? The original timeline before this story plays out that we don't know about this Davros. So no one has heard of Davros before this story. And yet he says here, now undoubtedly Davros is one of the finest. So maybe he's doing a little bit of ENT, maybe he's just assuming he's one of the finest scientific minds.
He's going off what he's been told mostly by the other people, and the consensus has been among, regardless of who he's talking to, that they all respect his scientific knowledge. It's just some people think he's gone too far with the experiments or the things that he's done. Nobody is doubting his intelligence, or that his original intentions were probably good. But it's good, again, going back to what I said about the different dynamics and agendas, is that Davros himself says to Niter, "This is what I know they're going to do, regardless of what they think my motives are. Ultimately, they're not going to care about that." So that's why he's basically I didn't spend a bunch of time trying to convince them that I'm really on their side, because that's not really important. All that matters is they do what I want them to do.
I think I would have written this slightly differently, because I would have been concerned about, like, what I mean is, like, in this, he's writing about Davros with a lot more knowledge of Davros than I think
he might be thinking, though, that if Davros created the Daleks, he must genuinely be a genius, just because he knows how smart the Daleks are and how dangerous they are.
Yeah, but I think I might have put something. I might have cut down the stuff with the rocket and added a little bit where the Doctor. I would have put something in about the Doctor realizing, sort of like gauging Davros's character, because it does look like he's got a very quick read on Davros.
Yeah, well, I don't think the way that's written there, I don't think that's exactly what he said, though, because he didn't say he works without conscience. He was talking about the Daleks.
Yeah. What happened is this is the original script. Yeah. And it's like I said, these are like little bits of the differences.
So that may have been something where either Holmes or somebody at that point, or even somebody pointed out that the Doctor wouldn't have as much knowledge of Davros, and that he should switch to talking about the Daleks, because I'm pretty sure he says, after the initial line about perpetuating himself in his creation, he says the Daleks are without conscience and soul and pity, or whatever. So rather than Davros himself.
Who's the Doctor talking to in that scene?
This is when they're talking to the Khaled leaders, because he's trying to prevent them.
So
he's giving them the speech.
That may be part of it as well. They're just thinking, okay, these guys respect Davros. They know his voice, so he's trying to say, okay, look, I'm acknowledging that Davros is.
Yeah. We get that. We get that tactics, a little bit of diplomacy. Yeah, we get that. But it's this bit. It's how he gets this read. Now, I mean, from our point of view, now we could argue that he's seen a lot of villains in his time, the Doctor, and he can pick up when somebody is, this guy's an 8, an NT, he's got a fanatical design.
I think later in one of the other, maybe even the next episode, in the review I wrote, I said something, and it's possible that the Doctor did the same thing that I did just earlier, which is sort of coming to the realization from his knowledge of the Daleks. Once he encountered Davros at all and was told about him, he had that idea of, now I understand why the Daleks are the way they are, if this is the guy that created them. And so that, and of course that ultimately comes to fruition in when Davros, points out just how much ultimate power is his goal, that the Doctor sort of comes to that realization a little bit earlier in terms of looking at them and saying, this must be what the guy has done. Yeah, I agree. It's sort of extrapolating that, but a little bit of a jump, but how you intuitives do.
Yeah, I would just like to have seen a scene where he sort of like sees him coming to this realization, rather than like this instant extrapolation of character that he gets, which is all very reasonable.
it might have worked better to have that scene, that action take place after he, had the confrontation with Davros that takes place in the next episode. Then it would really be more of a convincing thing.
Because actually, there is that particular bit where the Doctor asks him a certain question about what he would do in a certain situation.
Right.
That leads to that bit where Davros said, "Wow, that power would set me up above the gods." And it's like he asks him that question specifically to get a read on Davros's character.
Yeah, so I guess he sort of jumps to this conclusion. He's going to go ahead and allege this, and then he asks the question to get confirmation of what he already suspected.
Plus also, he could be using a little bit of tactics here because, he's trying to sell this action.
Right.
So, he might say fanatical desire to perpetuate himself. He might not actually believe that 100%, but it's definitely a strong possibility. And he is using a bit of rhetoric here to persuade them. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Very good, Jonathan. But I thought you were more referring to the bit at the start. But yeah, I mean, he's encountered a lot of villains and he's got to sell this. And then when he said a very impressive speech, Doctor, it was meant to be. All right.
I'll be right back.
Okay. So we've got the physical level, Jonathan. We've got the social level, and we've got a little bit of the interpersonal level in terms of, I would say, Ravon and Davros in terms of him being aware of this conspiracy. Where we lack a little bit, the thing I can get closest to an interpersonal conflict is right at that moment where Davros tells Nyder that he's prepared to sacrifice all of the Khaled civilians. Really, the entire that would mean that that's just a little bit of inner conflict. That's the closest thing I could detect to an inner conflict in this.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think it's how well Davros is written that really holds it together.
I just found out he was wearing a kilt the entire time.
Well, apparently he was because it was hot in that chair.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah. It would have been even hotter if they'd have had the lighting on as much as they used to have it on. But the director of this, David Maloney, he made sure they had that lighting turned down. He's given the technology available in his budget. I think he did as good a job as you could do. In that he said, we don't want to see much of the Daleks. I know they're not written in it much, right? Because the script is going to determine how stuff's going to be shot. But when he does show them, he shoots them from below to make them look bigger. And again, all of these things are like the walls and stuff. If this was lit more, all of these little imperfections would show up, and it would look like a school play set. But I think the mask is very good for the time, given that they didn't have brilliant rubber at the time. And I remember when you got to the late 80s, and then when you got to the 1990s, you got fantastic latex rubber, and probably at its best when they did the Alien, the Alien in Predator, when you get that latex mask where it's got a lot of movement and expression to it. I remember there was a very good mask for the Destroyer in about 1988 in a Sylvester McCoy story, and then they had fantastic makeup in Babylon 5. I'll just say about masks, what you want to make sure with a mask is try to have a collar on the back, because if you shoot them from behind and if you turn your neck, you get a crease in the skin of the alien, and it makes it look really bad, and it makes it look like a mask. So I noticed that.
Yeah, they did a really good job with this, to the point when I saw it as a kid. I was utterly convinced that this guy, that was his real face.
Wow. Do you think that's his real arm? Because I know in this episode his arm's always like that completely. So I'm wondering if the actor's actually just keeping the arm still, or if it's like a prosthetic and his arm's really here or something.
No, this is his arm, because
I don't remember reading about them using.
Oh, I would say, Jonathan, when they show close-ups of the hand, it does look a little bit glovey. Yeah, because like I said, with the thing with the skin, it's any kind of what would happen at the time is any kind of turn, you would see a crease. So that's why when I was talking before you're off edge, I was talking about in Babylon 5 where they would have high collars on the Narn, so that you would, because if you turn your neck, you see a crease in the neck skin. Whereas you've got a nice there.
Peter Miles playing different characters, obviously Michael Wisher did too, and if now I of course I have the knowledge of the multiple characters he played, but if you told me like you just saw the Ambassadors of Death and where he plays this reporter and you said this is the same guy who's Davros, like I would have a hard time believing you if you just told me that because they're just so nothing alike other than both being short.
Michael, I thought Michael Wisher was also very good. I love this story. It was very good as I think it was Carlick in Carnival of Monsters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Robert Homer story. Excellent, fun story, and one of the best first episode endings ever. The ending of the first episode of Carnival of Monsters. Right. I suggest people watch that. Right. What I would say from my experience of being in a school play, and for me, it's what I think helped his performance. When you act with someone who's good, when I acted with someone who was good, it really helped me in my performance. So I think that's one of the things that's going to help this actor, Peter Miles, is the fact that he was acting with someone who was good. Because then what you do,
this make a really good duo in terms of how they are. And back in my favorite Doctor Who story of all time, the Daleks Master Plan, there's a similar dynamic with Mavic Chen and his sort of second in command / henchman guy, but he's not in it as much for as long in the story, so they don't keep it up as long as he did in this. So I think again, Terry Nation sort of comes up with those, commander and second kind of dynamics often, and some of them are really well done.
And then some of them are Servalan and Chavez, in your opinion.
Well, and like I said before, when those two first came in, they were a good combination. It was only later on when things kind of
went a bit up
their original.
In that first season, I think Servalan was pretty much okay. I can see this as a mastermind female, INTJ female and it's her own personality came through because she literally had Jungian therapy between seasons. Jacqueline Pearce, and she grew up in and she had an education in a convent school, and so she had a sort of a revolution sexually, and also various costume designers. One of them used to design the costumes for Shirley Bassey, and so they became sort of very elaborate costumes. So there is a change in her.
That original dynamic between them, I think, was good, and that's another example of the same thing where Terry Nation comes up with these sort of 1-2 punches, where you have characters that have their similar agendas, but they're not completely on board with each other. So there's a little bit of tension there, but there's also like respect, so that's it's a good setup.
Yeah, and then initially, and there was lots of things they could have done. Like if they were redoing Blade 7 now, I would hope they would do more with Travis's character, where he's got more of affection for the surgeon that saved his life. When he said, "Oh, you said such and such was on that mission," the surgeon, not Dockley, there was a surgeon that saved Travis's life, and also his affection for that mutoid. Because he had affections for that woman who became a mutoid, Carol Royal's character. And she's a good-looking woman, Carol Royal, at the time. Anyway, so in the first, you remember they had that scene I was a little bit annoyed about where it was like the Dalek machine and it made it like, and it made the audience, if they just saw that scene, they might have got the impression that the Dalek is a robot. And so they need to be, it's just like I am with Kersey temperament theory, where I want to stress the difference between roles and types. With this, I want to stress with people there's a creature inside the Dalek. So they don't.
Oh, yeah. And he does specifically mention that in this episode, saying he wants. Yeah. So
it's just that particular one where it says a living machine creature. I just thought I would just add another line. It's like, because it's like when he shows that, I get the impression that he's just showing the robotic part of the Dalek on it without the actual creature.
Well, and that's why they have the scene with Ronson showing the doctor the mutations in the room. So he's basically, they're kind of creating that initial thing of, oh, is it just a robot Dalek? And then it's like, here's what actually is inside them. So
then they switch it on, and then it goes, Dalek, I must destroy it. But there's not a creature inside, and it's talking like one. So what's going on? So I just like to have like all the, from an NT point of view, I want it all nailed down in terms of like like a little bit of scientific realism here, as much as possible, to sort of help with me.
The realism is in the mystery in terms of the characters that we are sort of seeing and hearing everything through don't have access to that information, so neither do you.
Well, what I would say is, from a scientific point of view, I think that because genetic engineering was pretty new at the time in the 70s, because I did a little bit on genetics when I was at university, and they didn't do genetic fingerprinting until, I think that was Jeffries at Leicester University, and that was in about 1989. And this is the 1970s, they're talking about genetic engineering. So I think from a writing point of view, they were up with the science. And of course, later on, subsequent decades, they would have more and more stuff about genetic engineering in science.
I think from the initial appearance of the Daleks way back in the 60s, where they had the scene where they removed the creature from the casing and then it crawls out from underneath the thing, is that it's much scarier to the audience to have this idea of it being this organic creature as opposed to it just being robots. They're not nearly as menacing when it's just seen as robots. Then it's like, and especially it's sort of like, well, we can just blow up a bunch of them and it's just metal and circuitry that's blowing up. They don't think of it as big. These are independent thinking creatures, so it creates a whole nother layer of all the dramatic elements to it. Yeah.
So this is sort of like, I think this, in terms of an ending, this is sort of a little bit sort of crowbarred in ending just in order to sort of jeopardy.
I do want to say though, and this is not a diss of John Pertwee in any way, but I thought Tom Baker, whether it was himself or Maloney or Hinchcliffe or somebody restraining him, but I think he does a good job of not overacting in that cliffhanger, where we saw John Pertwee sometimes where he would do all these goofy faces when in a situation like that, and it kind of took some of the seriousness out of it. And whether it was the first take or not, the one that made it to air, I think he does a good job of portraying what's happening to him without seeming like he's just doing a bunch of over-the-top goofy faces.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a difference in backstory with those two, and I agree with everything you said. It's that John Pertwee had done a lot of comedy stuff before Doctor Who, and Tom Baker was like, it was almost with Tom Baker like, if he had a good script, he would do it properly because he had a proper, serious, theatrical.
Yeah, and he's very effective in doing comedy in the times where it's appropriate for him to. Yeah, but obviously, this is a situation where it would take away from it if he did, and so I'm glad that he didn't.
Oh yeah. Like I said, and Philip Hinchcliffe said that he rode him like a wild horse, and he made sure. And I think, genuinely, and I've seen it with another actor. I saw it with Bob Picardo when he played the Doctor or the emergency medical hologram in Star Trek Voyager. When he had a good script, he would act properly. When he had a poor script, he would do what Kate Mulgrew talked about, lifting the material, they would sort of like be a little bit campier in their performance. And I noticed that with Robert Picardo, like when he had a bad script, he would like overact. And when he had a very good script, he would act properly and let the material work. Any comments on that, Jonathan?
Not really, no.
Right. Okay.
Well, this time, it'll come as a shock to you that I'll be the one who brings up Blake Seven. But I remember we talked before about that being the case with Paul Darrow also, in terms of how he played Avon. From the start, he was a much more sort of restrained character, and then he got a little goofy in the final season when there seemed to be less restraints put on him by the directors or the producers.
Yeah, I mean, like, because in real life, he would like joke a lot, and but in seasons 1 and 2, he was like a bang-on performance of an INTJ. Like, you had nailed it. It's like, I've never understood why it should be necessary to become irrational in order to prove that you care. No, indeed, why it should be necessary to prove it. So it was like, in the way he performed it, bang on INTJ. But then his own personality comes through in seasons 3 and 4.
As we talked about before, that scene in the episode where he calculates exactly whether it's worth it to try to rescue the people down on the planet. Like, it's the most like NT moral dilemma scene ever. Where it's like, let me think about this. Let me get this exact calculation of whether I should actually save these people or not.
So we can survive how many, unless there's 4 ships chasing them, and how many ships are out there? 4. Is it a little smile, right? Suppose I better rescue them. Is the subtext. But yeah, I mean, the performance, it's like taking these things into account with what the actors and actresses are like in terms of their backstory and how it influences their performance. Right, what else was I say about this? So for Davros, I'll give this 9 out of 10. There's the little bits just take a tiny bit off for me. Like this, like from a pure story logic point of view, this bit is not entirely necessary to the story. The bit at the beginning with the having an escape attempt that doesn't work, but it was well lit. And oh yes, we didn't get interpersonal conflict with him, but we got some interaction between, and that's an interesting subplot, the relationship between Severin and Sarah. Just because that his performance adds a lot. Don't know what else to say about this. But yeah, I think we've covered all of the angles, apart from Gruber.
Yeah, I for the things I mentioned in terms of like still the film to video stuff, I don't really like the way they did that exactly, and also to me again the glaring omission that I keep pointing out is that they don't tell Davros's background, how he was mutated, why he, all that. It seems like there's an element to that they could have dealt with that they don't, and maybe it was cut and was written originally. I don't know, but either way, it's missing. It still doesn't hurt the overall story. So
Right.
Anyway, this episode I gave a 9 out of 10. So
That's interesting. I'd like to follow up on that because I read Robert McKee's book, Dialogue, and a big thing of his first book was about how exposition is handled. So, where would you have revealed that information about Davros's backstory?
well, I mean, I think they could have done it a little bit already in the first 3 episodes. It could have just sort of been sprinkled in the comments people made about Davros, and even in the initial thing where they talked about the Mutos, they could have compared and said, Davros was trying to perfect things even in himself. They could have made it where it's sort of like, it was always something where either could have talked about whether he was born with certain deformities and then he was trying to correct them, or various. There could have been something that sort of adds to that motivation to explain why he has this idea of trying to create this perfect being. There could have been more of his own personal anguish in there without it necessarily turning into a overly, sappy type of thing. You could have just added that element, because it leaves me wondering what's the real backstory of Davros. And unfortunately, I don't remember a lot about the later in the 80s Dalek stories, so don't tell me any spoilers, but I don't remember them really ever covering that and really exploring the origin of Davros. I think there's maybe some Big Finish audio stuff like much later on that do. But in the original series, I don't remember that ever really being touched on. So.
Yeah, there's one. Gary Russell did it as a Davros audio, maybe like 2003, and it's promising, but it's not great. It's not great, and there's certain economics things that they put in that are a little bit dumb. In about a wartime economy. Like they literally put in I don't know if you want to hear this, Jeff, but like they literally have this thing where the Daleks want to conquer the universe because it's good for their economy, and it's like, what? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
that's Keynesianism.
He actually does get a slight backstory in the newer series with Peter Capaldi. It's not really a backstory. It's more like the Doctor arrives on this strange planet, and there's this boy who's stuck in the middle of a minefield, and there's war and destruction everywhere. And the Doctor's got to rescue him, and he asks him, "What's your name?" And the boy says, "Davros." And the Doctor goes back in his TARDIS, comes back out with a gun. And I can't remember how it goes, but that's basically what we see of Davros. But the point is, as a child, he's normal.
Right. Well, I think one of the few changes I would have made to this story, I would have maybe cut down that sequence with the trying to escape. I would have actually given Davros a family and have a scene and see how he interacts with, say, a family member, and see how they view him, just to try and show, because I'm into this thing of like showing different sides to a character, especially of a sort of a villain character. And actually, that is one of the things that Jacqueline Pearce said that Servalan needed as a character is that she said Servalan needed a child so that you could see a different side of her character in the way that she would treat.
I think that works better with Davros though, because he's a monomaniacal man who creates a monomaniacal race, and I'd say that works a bit better. That also explains why he's so prepared to kill absolutely everyone, because he has no real attachments whatsoever. So I think
I want dense characterization though. I just don't want someone who's completely evil. Well, I want something to empathize with. I wouldn't
say necessarily makes them evil to not have a family or whatever. Also, let's be honest, there's probably nothing working down there.
It's the Essex last Jonathan Campbell with a rare reference there. But right, yeah. So
I think if anything, giving him a child with his personality would probably make him seem like more of a dick, because I can't imagine someone like that being a good parent at all.
So what I'll do is I'll wind up this video and I'll show you. There's a little video out there about the origins of Davros, done but as a comedy video, and it's actually quite funny. So I'll give it 9 out of 10. What do you give it, Jonathan?
Sure, Tim.
You did not watched it, even though you probably got the DVD.
What did you say?
I don't have the DVD. No, I do need to rewatch this.
Oh, if I sent you the episodes, would you watch them?
Not if you sent me. No, I can probably find them myself.
All right then. All right. Okay. What do you give it out of 10, Jeff?
9. I said that.
Okay.
I say I haven't.
Pay attention, Ben.
Yeah. I say I haven't watched. I mean, I haven't watched it recently. I have watched it.
Yeah, well, yeah. We like to do this thing where we sort of recount it at the end in case you want to go back in future.
What I've done is just to watch the review of the episodes and then.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to end the broadcast. I'm going to show you this funny video. I hope it's.
Join us next week for part 4. Bye.
So somebody.